It was 3 weeks later when the knock came. I was in the garden, kneeling beside the lavender bushes I'd planted that spring. The scent was comforting, soft and strong, like a memory that refused to fade. The knock came again. Firmer this time. I stood slowly, wiped my hands on my jeans, and made my way to the front door. It was James. Behind him, Julia stood holding the baby carrier, wrapped in pink fleece, about the size of my hand perched on top. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, thinner than I remembered. I opened the door fully but didn't step aside. "James." Julia spoke next. "We thought you might want to meet your granddaughter." There was a time when those words would have melted me. But now? They felt late. Coated in guilt. "I see," I said softly. I looked at the baby, tiny, asleep, innocent. None of this was her fault. "I know the hospital thing wasn't handled well," James began, rubbing the back of his neck. "We were just overwhelmed." "Overwhelmed," I repeated. He winced at my tone. "I wanted to reach out sooner." "You didn't," I said. Silence. Julia shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "We were hoping you might still be able to help out a bit, with child care when I go back to work. My mom's going to be out of town a lot." Ah. There it was. Not a visit. A request. I looked them both in the eye, then stepped aside just enough for them to enter the house. James smiled, relieved. Julia followed. They sat in the living room, same room where James had opened birthday gifts as a boy, same room where Julia had unwrapped her bridal shower gifts while barely meeting my eyes. I made no offer of tea. "I'm going to be very clear," I said, sitting across from them. "Because I think we've had enough of pretending in this family." Julia stiffened. James opened his mouth, then closed it. "I know about the transfers," I said. "From my savings." James paled. "And I know about the document you brought me last year, the one I thought was just a power of attorney. It gave you full control over everything I worked my whole life to build." Julia's voice cracked. "It wasn't like that. We just—" I held up a hand. "I don't need explanations. I've already corrected it. All accounts are in my name only. And the house, the will, the trust, none of it belongs to anyone but me now." James stared at the floor. "I spent years giving," I continued, my voice steady. "Hoping it would be enough to keep me in your life. But I finally realized, love isn't about earning your place. Especially not in your own family." Julia looked up. "So, you don't want to see the baby?" I looked at that tiny girl, her little fists curled like shells. "I didn't say that," I said. "But if you're here because you think I'll babysit, or fund another account, or quietly stay out of sight while you pull the strings, then no. That woman is gone." James looked like he wanted to cry. "Mom." I stood up. "You're welcome to visit. To rebuild. But not because you need something. Only if you want something real." They were silent. I walked to the door and opened it again, letting the cool breeze fill the hallway. "I'm going to the backyard now. To sit with my tea and enjoy the lavender. You're welcome to stay a while. Or go. But either way, I'll be fine." I stepped outside. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the lawn. I sat at my little patio table, steam rising from the cup beside me. Behind me, I heard the soft rustle of movement. Then silence. They had gone. I sipped my tea slowly, watching the wind dance through the trees, the same ones James and I had planted together so many years ago. Still standing. Still reaching for the sky. And I whispered to no one, with a calm that surprised even me. I wasn't unwelcome. I was just inconvenient to control. Then I smiled. Because now, I was free. I wasn't always like this, guarded, cold, watching every word behind a polite smile. No, there was a time I loved deeply. Openly. I gave without keeping score. Especially to my son. Especially to Caitlin. When James first brought her home, I saw a version of myself in her. Young, eager, shy but curious about everything. She asked me about my lasagna recipe. She helped me arrange flowers for the Thanksgiving table. She called me Mom within the first 3 months. I remember telling my husband, she's going to be good for him. Back then, I meant it. She was sweet. So sweet. Too sweet, now that I think about it. But I didn't notice. I only noticed how James looked at her like she hung the stars. I only noticed how she clung to me in the kitchen, telling me how lucky she felt to be part of our family. I gave her everything. When they got engaged, I helped plan the wedding. She wanted a spring ceremony. I hand-stitched lace onto the hem of her veil because she said it reminded her of her late grandmother's. I baked 200 cookies for the reception table. I wore pink instead of navy because she said navy felt too stiff. After the wedding, when James and Caitlin struggled to afford a down payment, I offered them the cottage. It wasn't just any house, it was my parents' place. The same one where I brought James home as a baby. The same one where I held him through his first fever, first heartbreak, first college acceptance letter. It held history. But I let them move in rent-free. I even helped them repaint every room. Caitlin said she wanted light green for the nursery, even before they had a baby. I didn't question it. I helped her pick out the paint swatches. I watched her and my husband laugh as they spilled paint on their shoes. I took pictures. It made me feel like we were 3 generations building something together. After James got his job upstate and started traveling more, I came by more often to help Caitlin. Groceries. Laundry. Even just to keep her company. My husband started going by even more than I did. At the time, I thought that was kind. Supportive. I told myself he was just being a good father-in-law. He'd drop off garden vegetables. Fix the porch light. Bring her ginger ale when she had morning sickness. When she miscarried their first baby, I was the one who sat with her for 3 nights straight, rubbing her back, holding her hand while she cried. My husband came by with flowers. She clung to him in the hallway and whispered, "Thank you for being here." She never said that to me. Still, I stayed. I stayed through it all. When they finally had their first son, I was in the delivery room. Caitlin said she needed me there. Not her mother, me. I cried. I held that baby like he was my own. I whispered into his ear, "Your grandma Elaine loves you more than life itself." We babysat every weekend. My husband loved those visits. Always insisted we stay a little longer. I thought it was sweet how he doted on Caitlin, how he helped burp the baby and washed the bottles. I didn't see it then. How her eyes lingered on him a second too long. How her smile stretched wider when he walked into the room. How she called him my lifesaver when he installed the baby gate. I ignored all of it. Because I wanted to believe that I was part of something good. That this family I gave everything to still saw me as the heart of it. Caitlin gave me a mug once. On Mother's Day. It said, "You're more than a mother-in-law. You're a second mom." I cried when she handed it to me. I kept that mug on the kitchen shelf, proudly on display, right next to the mug James made in kindergarten that said, "Best mom ever." I remember one day, Caitlin came over early in the morning. Said she was dropping off banana bread. My husband was already outside, gardening. She went to him first. I stood at the kitchen window and watched her hand him the tin. They laughed. She touched his arm lightly, just a friendly gesture. Or so I thought. When she came inside, she smiled too brightly. Made you your favorite. But I hated banana bread. Always have. Still, I smiled. I said thank you. Because that's what I did. I gave. I received. I smiled. I gave again. For years, I thought I was building a legacy. That every diaper I changed, every dinner I made, every secret I kept, every grace I extended was brick and mortar for the home we were all building together. Now, I wonder if I was just laying down the path for them to walk all over me. They say mothers-in-law can be cruel. Controlling. Overbearing. Maybe that's why I tried so hard not to be. I said yes more than I should have. I gave more than I had. I bit my tongue so many times it scarred. And all the while, I thought she loved me for it. I didn't know I was just convenient. A blindfold. A cover. A story she could spin to her husband and friends to make herself look like the perfect wife and daughter-in-law. I thought I gave her a family. Now I realize I gave her access. The next morning, I didn't speak. I went through the motions, brushed my teeth, brewed the coffee, toasted the bread. My husband shuffled in, still yawning, and kissed me on the cheek like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't sent a message to my daughter-in-law behind my back. Like he wasn't planning to call her once I fell asleep. He poured himself a cup, sat down at the table, and made small talk about the weather, about the tomatoes in the garden, about how our grandson was learning to walk. He said, maybe we can stop by and see him this weekend. I looked him in the eye, nodded once, and said, maybe. Then I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me. Upstairs, I picked up my own phone. I took a screenshot of the message thread from his phone, the one that said, "Good night, beautiful. I'll call you when Elaine's asleep." And the one from Caitlin, saying she missed his hands. I stared at it for a long moment. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't know if I wanted to send it. I didn't even know what I expected to happen if I did. But something in me needed to push the first domino. So I sent it. I texted it to Caitlin with no caption, no warning. Just the image. And then I waited. 1 minute passed. Then 5. Then 10. My stomach churned. I paced the bedroom, then stopped by the window and stared out at the oak tree in the yard. I thought of the tire swing James used to play on. I thought of how I used to bring him lemonade when he'd fall asleep on the grass after hours of pretending to be a superhero. My phone buzzed. Caitlin, what is this? That was all. No exclamation point. No apology. No fear. Just cold confusion. I typed slowly. Me, you know exactly what it is. The typing bubbles appeared. Then disappeared. Then nothing. I waited. 5 more minutes. Then I got another text. But not from Caitlin. It was from James. James, Mom. Why are you sending my wife these messages? My hands went cold. I couldn't believe it. I had sent proof of their betrayal. And he was angry at me? I wanted to laugh, but the sound stuck in my throat. I texted back. Me, ask your father. Another message came through. This time, longer. James, I don't know what you think you saw, but Caitlin says you've been acting strange lately. She said you've been cold, suspicious, jealous even. Please don't create drama where there is none. Jealous? I stared at that word like it was some alien language. Jealous? Of what? Of my husband being called darling by my daughter-in-law? Of the two of them sharing secrets and lies behind my back? I didn't know whether to throw the phone or throw up. But I didn't reply. Not to that. There was no point. Because I could already see how this was going to go. Caitlin had done what all manipulators do when the truth starts creeping too close. She turned it around. Painted me as unstable. As dramatic. As insecure. And James, poor James. He always had a soft spot for her. Too soft. He thought she was porcelain, fragile and pure. He didn't realize she was more glass than porcelain. Beautiful on the outside, but sharp enough to cut once she broke. Downstairs, I heard my husband still humming in the kitchen. I walked down slowly, like my legs didn't belong to me anymore. He looked up and smiled, chewing his toast. "Everything all right?" he asked casually. I walked to the table. Sat across from him. Folded my hands. "I sent Caitlin a screenshot," I said. His smile froze, just slightly. I saw it. That flicker of recognition in his eyes. "What screenshot?" he asked, too slowly. I stared at him. "You know what screenshot." He dropped his gaze. Reached for his mug. Took a sip. When he looked back up, his eyes had gone dull. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. Not "I'm sorry." Not an explanation. Not even anger, just cold dismissal. I felt my mouth go dry again. I had expected denial, maybe. Even fake outrage. But this? This was worse. "I shouldn't have," I whispered. He shook his head, as if I were the child. "It's not what you think, Elaine. Caitlin's been under a lot of pressure. I've just been trying to support her. She trusts me. We talk. That's all." I scoffed. "She misses your hands." He flinched. "Just barely." Then he sighed. "Maybe it got too close," he said. "But we never did anything. We never crossed a line." Never crossed a line. What a convenient phrase. A slippery little excuse to cover every bruise on the truth. I leaned forward, my voice low. "You crossed every line the day you let her call you darling." He didn't reply. He just got up, rinsed his plate, and walked out of the room. That was the second betrayal. Not the affair. Not the messages. But the way my own husband looked at me like I was the one who ruined everything. The way my own son believed her version of the story over mine. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the dishes I'd washed for them, the meals I'd cooked, the memories we'd made. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely disposable. But not broken. Not yet. The next morning, I didn't speak. I went through the motions, brushed my teeth, brewed the coffee, toasted the bread. My husband shuffled in, still yawning, and kissed me on the cheek like nothing had changed. Like he hadn't sent a message to my daughter-in-law behind my back. Like he wasn't planning to call her once I fell asleep. He poured himself a cup, sat down at the table, and made small talk about the weather, about the tomatoes in the garden, about how our grandson was learning to walk. He said, "Maybe we can stop by and see him this weekend." I looked him in the eye, nodded once, and said, "Maybe." Then I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me. Upstairs, I picked up my own phone. I took a screenshot of the message thread from his phone, the one that said, "Good night, beautiful. I'll call you when Elaine's asleep." And the one from Caitlin, saying she missed his hands. I stared at it for a long moment. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't know if I wanted to send it. I didn't even know what I expected to happen if I did. But something in me needed to push the first domino. So I sent it. I texted it to Caitlin with no caption, no warning. Just the image. And then I waited. 1 minute passed. Then 5. Then 10. My stomach churned. I paced the bedroom, then stopped by the window and stared out at the oak tree in the yard. I thought of the tire swing James used to play on. I thought of how I used to bring him lemonade when he'd fall asleep on the grass after hours of pretending to be a superhero. My phone buzzed. "Caitlin, what is this?" That was all. No exclamation point. No apology. No fear. Just cold confusion. I typed slowly. "Me, you know exactly what it is." The typing bubbles appeared. Then disappeared. Then nothing. I waited. 5 more minutes. Then I got another text. But not from Caitlin. It was from James. "James, Mom. Why are you sending my wife these messages?" My hands went cold. I couldn't believe it. I had sent proof of their betrayal. And he was angry at me? I wanted to laugh, but the sound stuck in my throat. I texted back. "Me, ask your father." Another message came through. This time, longer. "James, I don't know what you think you saw, but Caitlin says you've been acting strange lately. She said you've been cold, suspicious, jealous even. Please don't create drama where there is none." Jealous? I stared at that word like it was some alien language. Jealous? Of what? Of my husband being called darling by my daughter-in-law? Of the two of them sharing secrets and lies behind my back? I didn't know whether to throw the phone or throw up. But I didn't reply. Not to that. There was no point. Because I could already see how this was going to go. Caitlin had done what all manipulators do when the truth starts creeping too close. She turned it around. Painted me as unstable. As dramatic. As insecure. And James, poor James. He always had a soft spot for her. Too soft. He thought she was porcelain, fragile and pure. He didn't realize she was more glass than porcelain. Beautiful on the outside, but sharp enough to cut once she broke. Downstairs, I heard my husband still humming in the kitchen. I walked down slowly, like my legs didn't belong to me anymore. He looked up and smiled, chewing his toast. "Everything all right?" he asked casually. I walked to the table. Sat across from him. Folded my hands. "I sent Caitlin a screenshot," I said. His smile froze, just slightly. I saw it. That flicker of recognition in his eyes. "What screenshot?" he asked, too slowly. I stared at him. "You know what screenshot." He dropped his gaze. Reached for his mug. Took a sip. When he looked back up, his eyes had gone dull. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. Not "I'm sorry." Not an explanation. Not even anger, just cold dismissal. I felt my mouth go dry again. I had expected denial, maybe. Even fake outrage. But this? This was worse. "I shouldn't have," I whispered. He shook his head, as if I were the child. "It's not what you think, Elaine. Caitlin's been under a lot of pressure. I've just been trying to support her. She trusts me. We talk. That's all." I scoffed. "She misses your hands." He flinched. Just barely. Then he sighed. "Maybe it got too close," he said. "But we never did anything. We never crossed a line. Never crossed a line." What a convenient phrase. A slippery little excuse to cover every bruise on the truth. I leaned forward, my voice low. "You crossed every line the day you let her call you darling." He didn't reply. He just got up, rinsed his plate, and walked out of the room. That was the second betrayal. Not the affair. Not the messages. But the way my own husband looked at me like I was the one who ruined everything. The way my own son believed her version of the story over mine. I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by the dishes I'd washed for them, the meals I'd cooked, the memories we'd made. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely disposable. But not broken. Not yet. It had been nearly a week since I'd sent that screenshot. Caitlin never responded again. James went silent. My husband walked around the house like nothing had happened, like we were roommates in some emotionless arrangement. I cooked dinner in silence. He ate in silence. We slept in silence. And inside me, a storm brewed. I kept waiting for someone, anyone, to say, "You were right." But no one did. Until Sharon showed up. She knocked on my back door on a Thursday morning, holding 2 coffees and wearing that same floral scarf she's had for 15 years. I didn't even ask how she knew. Best friends don't need to be told. They feel it in their bones. "I brought the good kind," she said, holding up the cup. I let her in. We didn't hug. I just stood there for a second longer than I should have, staring at her like she was the last sane person left in my world. She sat at the kitchen table, pulled a napkin from her purse like she always did, and sipped. Then she looked at me. "What did he do?" she asked. I blinked. "What makes you think it was him?" Her eyes narrowed. "Because you're too quiet. And you always get like this when someone's taken a bite out of your soul." I stared at her coffee for a second. Then I said it. Slowly. Carefully. As if saying it too quickly would shatter me all over again. "Caitlin's been texting my husband late at night." I read a message. She called him darling. Said she missed his hands. He called her beautiful. Said he'd call her after I fell asleep. I expected Sharon to gasp. Or shout. Or at least mutter a curse. Instead, she tilted her head and said the 4 most healing words I'd heard all month. "You're not crazy, Elaine." My throat closed up. Tears burned my eyes. I looked away, pretending to check something on the counter. But she wasn't letting me off the hook. She leaned in. "You're not imagining this. You didn't misread. You didn't overreact. This isn't a harmless friendship. This is betrayal. And it's real." I wanted to sob into her arms like a child. But I didn't. I just nodded, hard, like I needed to shake something loose inside of me. Sharon reached across the table and touched my hand. "You've spent your whole life making yourself smaller so everyone else could feel more comfortable. You raised a good man. But now that man is married to a woman who wants your place, and she's not coming for it gently." My lips trembled. "I thought I was just being dramatic," I whispered. She squeezed my hand. "That's what they want you to think. Because if you doubt yourself, you won't fight back." I swallowed. My own son accused me of creating drama. "I know," she said, calm and even. "Because she got to him first. That's how women like Caitlin work. They're always sweet in public and strategic in private. She didn't just steal your husband's attention, she stole your credibility." That hit me like a brick. She had. Every time I tried to raise a concern, it came back to bite me. I was painted as jealous. Paranoid. Controlling. And I'd fallen for it. I'd questioned my instincts. I'd doubted my own reality. Sharon leaned back. "This isn't about revenge. It's about clarity. It's about seeing the game board for what it is. You gave her a place in your family. And instead of honoring it, she used it. Now you get to decide, are you going to keep giving, or are you going to take your power back?" I didn't answer. Not right away. I looked around my kitchen, my sacred space. The room where I'd peeled carrots for James when he was 4. Where I used to slow dance with my husband to Sam Cooke on rainy nights. Where I taught Caitlin how to make pie crust. I'd built this world. And somehow, I'd been pushed to the edge of it. Take it back, Sharon said gently. Start with one thing. Just one. Your house. Your voice. Your schedule. Something. I nodded slowly. One thing. That I could do. Sharon smiled. And for the record, I never liked how she called you Mom. She made it sound like a performance. That made me laugh, an ugly, broken, needed laugh. And in that laugh, I felt the first stitch in a wound that had gaped open for days. That afternoon, after Sharon left, I walked into the guest bedroom, the one where we kept the old photo albums, the legal files, the extra linens. And I opened the file cabinet. It was time to look at everything again, with new eyes. With clear eyes. The house deed. The will. The passwords. The emergency contacts. I hadn't done it in years. I'd let my husband handle most of it, as I always had. But Sharon was right. I needed to start somewhere. And so I did. Quietly. I started with the file cabinet. Just like Sharon said, one thing at a time. I pulled out the manila folders my husband had labeled in his tidy handwriting: taxes, retirement, James, college, house deed, medical. Years of documents, neatly organized, a life built line by line. I thumbed through them, quietly, steadily, like I was touching old ghosts. And then I saw a folder tucked at the back of the drawer. No label. Just a plain green folder with a rubber band holding it closed. Something in me paused. It wasn't like him to leave something unlabeled. I took it out, set it on the table, and slid off the band. Inside were printed emails. Dozens of them. Some with Caitlin's name. Some with scanned legal forms. And some, God help me, with my name crossed out in red ink. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The first page was an email dated 6 months ago. From a lawyer. Subject line: Joint Ownership Amendment Draft attached. I read it once. Then twice. Then my knees buckled. He had been working, secretly, to amend our home's title. Removing my name from sole ownership and adding Caitlin's name beside his. There it was. In ink. The house I inherited from my parents. The home I brought James to as a newborn. The home I had maintained for 40 years while he managed the paperwork. And now, he was trying to give it, my home, to her. My hands began to shake. The air around me went cold. There were more emails. One from Caitlin. Let me know when the papers are finalized. I want this to be a surprise for James. He's always loved the garden. I stared at that line like it was poison. A surprise. She wanted to gift my own home to my son like it was hers to give. There were also notes from my husband. Drafts. He had typed them and printed them, probably for safekeeping. One of them read: Elaine doesn't need to know until after the transfer is filed. It will all feel cleaner that way. She's sentimental, not logical. It'll be easier if we don't involve her. Easier. Cleaner. Like I was the mess in the way. Another note. Caitlin says she doesn't feel comfortable raising the boys in a house that isn't secure. If something happens to me, I want her to have the protection she deserves. I stood up and stumbled to the sink. Protection? She wanted protection? From what, me? The woman who rocked her babies, folded her laundry, peeled her apples when she was pregnant because the smell of skin made her nauseous? That's when it hit me. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. This was financial manipulation. This was legal erasure. They weren't planning to hurt me emotionally. They were planning to replace me entirely. Silently. Slowly. Paper by paper. I went to his desk next. The little locked drawer he always kept closed. I knew the password. It was our wedding anniversary, March 22, 1983. He never changed it. He thought I never paid attention. But I did. I always did. The drawer clicked open. Inside was a USB stick. A notepad. And a letter addressed to James and Caitlin. I pulled it out with trembling hands and read. If anything happens to me, the house is yours. Elaine will understand. This is what's best for everyone. Take care of the garden. She never truly used it anyway. I had to sit down. This was his plan. In full. The lie wrapped in kindness. The slow removal of my name, my worth, my presence, from everything. He had positioned it like he was doing me a favor. Taking a burden off my back. But I wasn't a burden. I was the foundation. And they were chiseling me away without a word. I sat there for a long time, the house around me echoing with a silence I had never known. I could hear the hum of the fridge. The clock ticking in the hallway. The sound of a lawn mower in the distance. Normal sounds. But nothing about this was normal anymore. I walked upstairs and stared at the wedding photo on the wall. Him in a gray suit. Me in a dress I had sewn myself. We looked happy. Naive. Strong. I whispered to that woman, he gave away what you built. And then I looked at Caitlin's family photo on the bookshelf, her, James, the boys, and my husband kneeling beside them, holding their youngest. No me. Not even in the background. And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't about lust. It wasn't even about love. This was about legacy. They wanted to write me out of the story completely. That night, I didn't cry. Not a tear. There's a kind of grief that dries you out completely. You don't scream. You don't rage. You just start building something in the silence, brick by quiet brick. I waited until he left for his morning walk, same as always, 6:45 a.m., earbuds in, walking stick in hand. Then I picked up the green folder. The emails. The notepad. The USB. I made copies of everything. 2 sets. One for me. One for someone else. Then I made a call. Sharon, I said, voice steady. Do you still have the number for that divorce attorney? The one your sister used? She didn't ask why. She just said, yes. I'll text it to you now. I booked an appointment under my maiden name. I showed up early, dressed in gray slacks and a calm face. The lawyer, a sharp woman with streaks of silver in her bun, took one look at the documents I brought and said, "You've been patient too long. Let's get to work." That same afternoon, I checked into a separate bank account. An old one my mother had opened for me when I was 20, long forgotten but still alive. I moved enough to protect myself. Enough to move quickly. I also reached out to James. Not with anger. With calm. I texted. I need to speak with you. Just you. No drama. Just facts. He didn't respond. I didn't expect him to. Not yet. Caitlin had him wrapped too tight in her web. So I went another way. I contacted the title office. Requested a freeze on property amendments due to suspected fraud. Submitted the emails. The date stamps. The memo with my name crossed out. The clerk said she'd escalate it. Then I waited. But while I waited, I worked. I dug up our marriage documents. The original property deed. The handwritten will we'd both signed 20 years ago when James was still in high school. I highlighted my ownership, the rights they thought I was too sentimental to fight for. And I smiled, because I still had power. He had underestimated me. They both had. I wasn't the same woman who hand-stitched baby quilts for Caitlin. I wasn't the naive mother-in-law who smiled through the condescension and baked pies for Sunday dinner. I was the woman who kept records. The woman who remembered every password. The woman who still had the receipts. And so I moved. Quietly. Strategically. I didn't confront. I didn't scream. I didn't even change the locks. I let them believe I was still reeling. That I was still in the dark. That I was fragile. People reveal more when they think you're broken. My husband kept up the act, too. Brought me tea one evening. Kissed my temple and said, "We should take a trip this summer. Just us." I nodded and said, "That would be nice." What I didn't say was that I'd already met with the lawyer again that morning. I didn't say I'd already filed paperwork for a separation of assets. That the home was now frozen from any transfers. That every bank account had been documented and flagged. I even took photos of the messages, printed and timestamped. I created a small folder titled Insurance. And hid it somewhere they'd never look, taped to the underside of the sewing machine I hadn't touched in years. Because I knew this wasn't over. People like Caitlin don't just disappear when caught. They twist. They cry. They manipulate. And men like my husband? They cave. So I waited for the next move. And when it came, I was ready. One afternoon, Caitlin showed up at the front door. Alone. She didn't ring the bell. Just stood there, bold as brass, in my doorway, holding a batch of scones. "I thought we should talk," she said. I stepped aside, let her in, and watched her walk into my kitchen like it belonged to her. She placed the scones on the counter, then turned to me with that same syrupy smile. "I know things have been tense. I just want us to go back to how things were. For James. For the boys." I didn't speak. She went on. "I think maybe there was a misunderstanding. Sometimes people read into things that aren't really there. You know how texts can look worse than they are. There it was. The gaslight. I let her talk. Let her twist the narrative. Then I said, I filed for a legal review of the house transfer." The color drained from her face. "What?" I held her gaze. "The amendment. The one you and my husband drafted without my consent. I've frozen it." She blinked fast. I didn't." "Don't," I said softly. "I've seen the emails." And then I leaned forward, voice low. "You planned this like I was asleep. Like I was a ghost in my own home. But I'm not. I'm wide awake now." She didn't respond. Just stood there, the smell of lemon scones growing sickening in the air. And I smiled. A calm, quiet, knowing smile. Because she thought I was still playing the role she assigned me. But I had written a new one. And in this version, she wasn't the main character anymore. It happened 2 weeks later. James texted me. A dry, cautious message. "We're stopping by this weekend with the boys. Thought it was time to clear the air." No apology. No accountability. Just the arrogant assumption that he could set the terms for reconciliation. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because everything had already been set in motion. I had signed the revised ownership papers with my attorney. Removed my husband's amendment attempt. I was now the sole title holder of the property, again. Frozen, protected. Legal. I also removed him from our joint accounts. Left enough for him to function, but nothing more. The lawyer helped me divide everything legally, every asset accounted for, every trail covered. I transferred the utilities to my name only. I canceled all the automatic payments tied to his card. And I left one final envelope on his desk, right on top of the green folder. Inside was a single page. This house is no longer yours to give. This life is no longer yours to manipulate. I saw everything. I forgave nothing. The day they returned, it was sunny. Mid-morning. The kind of day when birds chatter too loudly and everything feels deceptively peaceful. I was already sitting on the front porch, a mug of tea in hand, when James pulled into the driveway. Caitlin sat beside him in the passenger seat, sunglasses too big for her face, expression unreadable. The boys were in the back, waving like they always did. I gave them a small wave, my heart breaking a little, because they were innocent in all this. They were just children. Pawns in a game they didn't know they were part of. James stepped out first. "Mom," he said, as if nothing had happened. As if the last month hadn't torn our family at the seams. I nodded. "James." Caitlin walked up behind him. She wore her performance smile, the one she always used when guests were over. The one that used to fool me. Not anymore. "I brought your favorite," she said, holding up a bakery box. "Peach cobbler." I didn't look at the box. I looked straight through her. "Why don't you come in?" I said. They stepped inside the house, still assuming they were welcome. Still assuming the world would rearrange itself for their comfort. But something was different. The walls were bare. The living room furniture, the same couch they used to nap on, the armchair where my husband read stories to the boys, was gone. The photo albums. The wedding picture. Even the family portraits above the mantel. Gone. "What?" James turned around slowly. "Where is everything?" I stepped in behind them, calm as a storm about to break. "I sold the furniture. Donated the rest." Caitlin blinked. "You what?" "I don't keep things that carry lies." James looked angry now. The mask cracking. "You didn't even tell Dad?" I tilted my head. "He doesn't live here anymore." Silence fell like a stone. Caitlin's mouth opened. Then closed. I walked past them, into the kitchen, where only one chair remained at the table, mine. I turned around and said the words I'd been waiting to say. "You took what was mine behind my back. So I took it back right in front of you." James's jaw clenched. "You're breaking this family." I laughed, quiet and sharp. "This family broke when you let your wife lie to my face for years. It broke when your father called her beautiful while I slept upstairs. It broke when you believed her over me." Caitlin stepped forward. "Elaine, please, let's talk. For the boys." I shook my head. "You don't get to use the children as a shield now. You made your choices. You tried to erase me. And now, you're the ones erased." James looked around again, finally starting to understand. "I don't even know who you are anymore." "No," I said. "You only ever knew the version of me who kept forgiving." There was nothing else to say. The boys ran in from the car, laughing, asking about cookies. My heart cracked, but I stood firm. "You'll always be welcome for short visits," I told them gently. "But this isn't your home." "Not anymore." James stared at me like I'd struck him. And then, finally, he said it. "I didn't know." I nodded. "That was your choice." Caitlin reached for his arm. Pulled him toward the door. He followed, confused, defeated, still not understanding how the woman he called Mom had turned into someone he couldn't manipulate. They walked back to the car. Everything they thought they controlled had slipped through their fingers like sand. And I sat back down on my porch chair, sipped my tea, and watched them leave. They never looked back. The house is quiet now. Not the suffocating quiet I used to dread, when silence meant avoidance, meant something unsaid was waiting to explode. No, this quiet feels earned. Outside the kitchen window, the garden sways with summer. The hydrangeas I planted last season are blooming strong, lavender, blue, a bold pink at the edge near the fence line. The birds are louder here now. Or maybe I just finally started listening again. The furniture is different. The space is new. But the soul of this house, my house, is mine again. I kept only what mattered. One framed photo on the mantel, me holding baby James, swaddled in a yellow blanket. I look young, exhausted, happy. I look like a woman just beginning to build a life. And beside that photo, a small ceramic bird James made in 2nd grade, lopsided, chipped at the wing, but still here. Just like me. Some nights, I sit at the window with a glass of tea and watch the lights from the neighbor's porch flicker on. I hear dogs barking down the street, the hum of distant traffic, the thud of my own steady heartbeat. It's funny how much space peace can take up when you're not chasing it anymore. My husband moved out the following week. He left a note, 2 lines on the back of an electric bill. I never meant to hurt you. I just didn't know how to say I was lost. I folded it once and tucked it in the trash. Because lost is a choice when you leave a map on the table and walk away anyway. James hasn't spoken to me since the confrontation. Caitlin sent a card. White, unlined, and signed. Just blank. A fitting goodbye from a woman who was always pretending to mean more than she said. I think about them sometimes, not in anger. Not even in grief anymore. Just in distance. Like you think about neighbors you used to wave to before they moved away. Familiar, but no longer part of your route. I've started doing new things. I joined a local garden club. I signed up for Tai Chi in the park on Tuesdays. I made a friend, Lana, who also got blindsided by a daughter-in-law who wanted her house. We laugh over it now. Not because it's funny. But because surviving gives you permission to laugh again. And laughter, I've found, is the loudest form of closure. Yesterday, I walked barefoot across the kitchen tile. The same floor where I once stood sobbing over banana bread I didn't ask for. The same tile I once knelt on, heartbroken, reading texts that split my life in two. I stopped in front of the kitchen window. Looked out. The wind stirred the tall grass. A hawk circled far above. And for the first time in years, I whispered something out loud, just to myself. I am still here. Not the version of me who bent to stay likable. Not the woman who let herself be softened until she disappeared. But me. Whole. Calm. Unmoved. People always imagine revenge is loud. Explosive. But the most powerful revenge? Is peace. Because peace is the one thing they can't fake, can't steal, and can't survive without trying to destroy. I finished my tea. Washed the mug. And left the window open.